So thanks everyone for being here. This is going to be a small session. It was small from the beginning. We have only 3 participants, and one of them is apparently not here yet. So, and I would like to introduce first myself. My name is Priscila. I'm based in Brazil. I'm a professor here at the university that's hosting this event. And I work with fisheries in general, not just freshwater fisheries, but also coastal fisheries and island fisheries. And I'm a human ecologist. I'm not a limnologist, as most of you are. Even though my background is in ecology, I join in my research, economic, cultural, social, and ecological aspects to understand both the fishery side, the stocks, but also the consequences of losing fisheries, losing fish to people, to the communities that depend on it. I would like to invite my co-host, Leonardo Castelo, to introduce himself. Please, Leonardo. Thanks for joining me. I know you are in another conference right now.
Actually, so I'll jump to the other meeting a few minutes after this one ends. My name is Leonardo Castelo. I'm a oceanographer who ended up working in the middle of the Amazon and working a lot with shallow lakes. And a lot of my work is on fisheries conservation and management. And I was, graciously invited by Priscila to help organize this meeting. So I'm very eager to see what the discussion goes. I saw the presentations. We have only, unfortunately, 3 presentations, but I thought, they raised some good points. So looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. I guess before we give the word to Lily, I was watching the presentations again, and I apologize because I realized some of my slides are cutting in the end, like 3 or 4 of them, like you missed the last words. I'm sorry about that. But I was trying to come up with what are the common factors that can link these 3 presentations. And other than the fact that they're talking about what's happening in fisheries in shallow lakes. One takes place in Madagascar, another one in the Amazon, and another one in the semi-arid region of Brazil. And I think the one first factor, an important one, is that these lakes are fished by small, vulnerable communities, whatever they are. Another factor that strikes me as important is that the 3 regions lack data. And the effort of this group, of these presentations, was to try to come up with ways to get more information on what's happening in these lakes. So Lily, for example, she's using different approaches to get historical paleolimnological data. She can go back in time much more than we can, even though I think she didn't go that back, but she has that potential. We used a different technique. We used people's memories to try to track what happened in the past with their lakes. And Hélio, who is not here, he was more interested in the current situation of these lakes and the kind of ecosystem services that people derive from them. In one of the talks, we have, it's just about native species, which is the one in the Amazon. And in the other talks, I also found out that Lily and Hélio, they were dealing with exotic species as well. It's not something that Hélio brings out in his presentation, but when you look at the species that he's catching, that people are catching, you see like there's overlap with what Lily is talking about in Madagascar. Like tilapia, for example, is present in both of them. So I think this would be like the basic general idea that I see that connects this, the 3 studies. I don't know if Leandro, if you can add something to that as well.
No, I had the same impressions. 2 out of 3 more or less focus on the need to come up with more information, and they have very different approaches.
Mm-hmm. So now, Lily, I don't know, would you like to? Well, actually, we have time in case you want to do your full-on presentation. Like we have plenty of time. We have an hour and a half to basically deal with 2 presentations here. So we don't even have to do an elevator pitch as I suggested. Please feel free to do whatever you feel like.
Okay, maybe I won't go through the whole talk in case that it seems like people have already watched it before. But yeah, you're right. So my work looks at a historical perspective of this lake using a lake sediment core. And what's unusual, I guess, about our work is we're only looking at the last few hundred years to look at modern human impacts at the lake, rather than sometimes it can be thousands of years or tens of thousands of years that people are looking back at. And from my work, we found the presence of a submerged plant that's not present in the lake anymore. So that was really interesting. And you also see a sort of decline in water lily seed abundance, and an increase in this Cauberus remains, which is a type of predatory macroinvertebrate. And there's actually another talk in this conference about Cauberus, so that's really interesting. And we suggest that maybe this change occurs around the time of the introduction of tilapia to the lake. We've done this by dating sediments and talking to local people about when they think that the tilapia is introduced, but it's not as formal as your interviews. So I think that's something that definitely would be helpful to this area, is to interview local fishermen more. But yeah, we propose that maybe the tilapia introduction has resulted in competition with native predatory or native insectivorous fish species in the lake. And if they're feeding on the submerged plants, or I've also spoke to Maria, who I think is on this call, about her work on tilapia. So maybe they're feeding on the plants, or maybe the tilapia is causing eutrophication, which is resulting in a loss of submerged plants. And yeah, outcompeting these native fish species that could cause an increase in Cauberus. But it's all very preliminary. I'm quite new to the fish world, so we're sort of now using this conference to network with other people. And then we have the work of Lawrence, who's actually on this call as well. So she's a Malagasy PhD student who I work very closely with, and I also present her data of a more experimental approach using exclosure experiments to see the effect of the tilapia in cages and not in cages. And she found that tilapia presence reduced the survival of this submerged plant. It's not in the lake now, but she got some from a local lake where it's still grown. And she also found that chironomid abundance was higher with the submerged plant in these cages than in just trays with sediment. And the chironomids are important to this very rare species of duck that's been introduced to the lake. And maybe that's what I should have started with. But yeah, this site is of importance because the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust, who myself and Lawrence both work with, have introduced this very rare species of duck there as the most suitable habitat for the duck that they found in Madagascar, but it does still need restoration work. And yeah, one of the impacts is the introduction of this invasive tilapia, which we're trying to untangle from deforestation in the catchment as well, and pesticide use, which they did interviews of local people in the catchment on pesticide use, and from that they found it's probably in the 2000s that pesticides were being used, and synthetic pesticides were being used in the area. So more modern than the tilapia introduction, which they think was done 40 years ago in the 80s or maybe 90s. But yeah, I hope that's a good summary.
I'm going to open to the public to ask you questions. It struck me that while I was watching your talk, the first thing that would occur to me is like, if you're going to talk about restoration, the first thing to do would be to remove tilapia, right? But then you say like, that's not an option because tilapia is very important to the locals there.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's also interesting because we don't actually know much about what the fish community was like before the introduction of tilapia. When you talk to local people, they say that they didn't bother fishing that lake before. So I don't know if it's just the species of fish that were present there weren't suitable for fishing. But we have had a photo of another type of fish that they caught, which is a type of goby. But otherwise, eels are quite common in these lakes. So I'm sure there are some eels there. But other than that, we don't really know what was there before. So, yeah.
And with the methods you have, you cannot trace back, for example, cyst eggs, or there's no past evidence of the kind of fish that you could find there?
Yeah, it can be. You can get evidence of past fish, but for some reason in my core, I'm not getting any. Yeah, you'd expect fish scales or sometimes the ear bones, or certain parasites of the fish that confirms their presence. So yeah, that's why we're looking at sort of other indirect indicators of fish presence.
So it's up to you guys. If you have any questions, please just ask Lily now.
Lily, if I may, so I watched your talk yesterday, but now that you were explaining it quickly again, it came up to my mind. How can you differentiate the ecosystem changes observed were due to tilapia introduction and say not changes in overfishing and vegetation in the whole lake, independently of tilapia?
Yeah, it definitely could be indirect. We had, it's just a preliminary hypothesis, but we thought of it because the change occurs around the time where we know that tilapia were introduced, whereas deforestation of the catchment, for example, we have satellite imagery of the lake in the 1960s, and it was already completely deforested by then, or deforested to a similar level to now. So we estimate that that happened a lot earlier. And then pesticide use, synthetic pesticide use is happening later. So yeah, we don't know for sure, but that's just our preliminary hypothesis. It could definitely be a combination of effects, or I was talking to Maria, and she sort of suggested that maybe that is the tilapia contributing to eutrophication, which is, but also sediment input from deforestation could also be contributing to that as well.
You want to continue, Leandro? Is there another question?
It looks like Maria has a question.
Yes, Maria says she has a few questions.
Yeah. Hello, Lily. Hi, Priscila.
Hi, nice to see you.
Nice to see you again. I have some questions that I saw your presentation, but it's more about your data because I'm curious, because I'm still searching for a lot of things that is missing for tilapia, and I was thinking here. The first one is I would like to know what is the species that is of tilapia that you have there, just to clarify my mind.
Yeah, we don't actually know what, we don't have a species confirmation yet. I'm not really a fish person, so I don't know how easy with tilapia would you be able to tell the species from a photo, or would you need a biological sample?
Okay, because I have some species that eat macrophytes as well. I said to you before that most of the species of tilapia, they decrease the macrophytes because of the eutrophication, the effect of eutrophication. But some species, baby tilapia mozambico, they can eat macrophytes, and then they can do this. But we have to see this. Another things that I would like to ask you, I saw that you have data from I never know how to pronounce the name, chironomids, I don't know.
Yeah.
But if you have data of zooplankton or algae, chlorophyll, I would like to know, because you have really beautiful data from the paleolimnological analysis, right?
Yeah.
Also, you have some data from time that you have, And for example, I send you my papers, and we don't have this data from zooplankton and algae. And there is a thing that is really missing to explain a lot of things in the feedbacks of tilapia and the eutrophication, and the feedbacks from the population dynamics of tilapia. And well, if you have, I would like to have some talks after, just to see if it's confirmed my hypothesis.
Yeah, so I am getting the remains of Aphippia, so Daphnia Aphippia, and I'm going to be looking, so the eggs, and I'm going to be identifying them. But again, I'm not really an expert, so I try to do them by type 1, 2, 3, and I sort of, it was changing, but then I spoke to some experts and they said no, it's all wrong, so I'm re-identifying them. But yeah, I'll definitely be able to talk to you more about that when I'm really interested to see the record, if it changes by what type of Aphippia there are. So
okay, and I will also, last question, okay.
Go
like
ahead.
if you have some data of tilapia reproduction, or you don't have this?
Yes, yeah, there is being, we are monitoring the catch data, because I don't know if I mentioned it in my talk, but they have been trialing a no fish zone in the lake to try and improve the size of tilapia catch. But yeah, there's definitely catch data for the tilapia coming out. I think mean weight of catch and the length of some of the fish too. Yeah.
Okay, and I also forget, I have the last question. Another question. If you have what kind of predators that you have there? Because sometimes they are really important to control tilapia population and avoid these effects. And if you have small predators or predators that don't eat tilapia, the trend is that the lake that you have, this lake, become a lot higher in eutrophication in the lake, as the lakes that we have here with the small size of tilapia. So I would like to know about it.
Yeah, as I mentioned, we don't really know what was in the lake before. We don't actually know what other species were native and present before. I'm sure there's this type of eel that has quite a mixed diet, which could maybe be feeding on them. But otherwise, it's this type of goby, which I've been trying to look up the diet, but it's not that clear. But I don't think they would be feeding on tilapia. But yes, thank you for all of that. That was really interesting, and definitely.
There's a couple of other questions here, but before, I would like to ask Maria one question. So is there a lot of tilapia species in different countries within the same country? Because there seems to be, like in Brazil, there seems to be one species that dominates everything.
Yeah. Yes. Usually, the most introduced is the tilapia nilotica, the Oreocomus niloticus. But here in Brazil, we have also Mozambicus, but in small amounts. In other country as well, but they are the main tilapia are Oreocomus niloticus and Mozambicus, usually, that they are introduced, or the red tilapia. The tilapia, red tilapia is I forgot the name of the species.
And then this profile changes according to the country. So in Madagascar, Mozambicus, for example, can be way more important than Niloticus.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, so thank you, Maria. So Larissa has a question. She's asking, in addition to collecting tilapia, did you collect other fish? Do you know which fish are native to this lake? I think you kind of talked about this a little bit, but we can go back to that.
Yeah, I'm just typing the 2 species names of the one fish that we have confirmed that is present in the lake, and the species of eel that is probably present in the lake. But yeah, as I said, other than that, we don't have any confirmation of what else would be there.
There is Rodolfo is also asking something.
Hi, nice to see you again. You all again.
Yeah, it's the
Some
same.
of you. I was wondering if Lily or maybe Maria knows that, to what extent the effects that you see on the reduction of some of the invertebrates that you see in that lake, to what extent that could be due to direct predation or to indirect effects like plant biomass reduction or eutrophication or anything like that? Because we did some experiments kind of betting on the predaceous potential of one of the species of tilapia that we have in Brazil, but we are not sure of how generalizable those results would be to a real lake.
Yeah, so I think maybe Maria is better to answer that, because with paleolimnology, it's actually is really hard to untangle the different effects. So it's sort of an educated guess on what might be happening rather than being able to say this directly impacted this and caused this. But you just use the timings of events and what you're seeing in the record. But yeah, I think, Maria, I don't know if you'd like to come back to discuss that.
Rodolfo, right?
Yeah.
Yes, it may be an indirect effect as well, because tilapia, in fact, tilapia eats invertebrates, but the indirect effect of eutrophication or input of the sediments that he made maybe decrease the macrophytes and the invertebrates, and maybe an indirect effect. I believe that this indirect effect is really, really strong.
So it's a mess. That's
yes, yes,
okay.
Yeah, and yeah, okay.
Yeah, I do realize that indirect effects are pretty strong. I kind of wanted to know your opinion, both of you, on that.
Yeah, because your work found that the tilapia were predating on the insectivorous macroinvertebrates, right?
Yeah, but it was a very controlled experiment. I mean, we basically gave not many other options for them to eat. You know, we didn't have macrophytes. We did have zooplankton, but we didn't measure that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's more sort of anecdotal, but there's several lakes in the area where there were these submerged charophyte plants in the past, and then tilapia has been introduced, and a few years later it's completely gone. So yeah, it will be interesting to explore more.
Thank you.
So it wasn't clear to me what happened in 1980s, more or less.
That we think that's when the tilapia were introduced into the lake.
You don't know for sure.
No, that's just sort of anecdotal. It's not. It would be much better, you know, to do a sort of similar set of interviews like you've done on your work of getting it formalized. But yeah, it's just, I think it's talking to local people in the area. They say, oh, roughly, you know,
so it wasn't
many years ago.
Like, it wasn't a government intervention, like they didn't plan to, it wasn't like a concerted effort to introduce the species, just people just brought the species there.
That's from what I know, yeah, but it's just, that's information that's been passed through people working in the local area that we are in contact with, who've been in contact with the fishermen. So.
And they never restocked the lakes?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I guess you don't need to do that with tilapia. It's pretty aggressive.
Yeah.
So here we tried to remove, because we know the species we've been losing because of tilapia. And here, actually, the government introduced tilapias in the reservoirs, especially in the semi-arid region where we are. And there was a huge drought 6-7 years ago. And Coca, the main organizer, his maybe in the last 20 years, his focus has been, not recently, but between 20 and 8 years ago, his focus was on the effects of tilapia in lakes, in shallow lakes, including reservoirs. And he unfortunately, he cannot be here, but he promised to watch your presentation because he's interested in giving feedback, and another person too, another organizer whose experience is also with the effects of tilapia, Rosenberg. So, so what he, due to this drought, we asked for funding to try to restore a lake to remove all the tilapia. And that was, even though the lake was pretty much dry, we didn't succeed. First, we got together with the fishers and we just told them, like, fish the hell out of here. Like, no limits, get as much fish as you want, because we knew everything was gonna die. So just get as much tilapia out. Other things would come, but it's mostly after tilapia comes, it's mostly tilapia. The other species, the native ones, are usually smaller, and some of them just disappear after tilapia is in the area. And after that, we tried to remove some of the sediments too, but we couldn't remove everything. So it just came back. Even though the lake was pretty much dry for a long time, it's just there. The eggs are just there in the sediment, and with the first rain, they're back.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And yeah, thanks for telling your colleagues about the talk. It'll be really interesting to hear from them. Yeah, but that's what's interesting about this lake, is that I guess it makes it easier that the aim is not for complete removal, because as you say, it sounds sort of impossible. But I guess it's about whether there's a way to manage the fisheries so that it reduces some of these negative impacts somehow. Like, I'm really interested to hear about how they change their diet with size. But yeah, it seems that Brazil is really leading the way with tilapia research. Everything I've read about tilapia, it seems to be from Brazil. So
I guess it's everywhere here. So it's a problem. We know, I think one of Coca's work, he can tell which species we lost in the region here because of tilapia, and how diversity has fully changed after it was introduced. And it's not just tilapia. People, like you were saying, they did in Madagascar. With other species, they just think, there is this Amazonian species that's really productive and it's big. Let's just stock our lakes with that. No control at all. Yeah, it's kind of sad.
Yeah.
There's Hernandez is also talking. Do you want to open your mic, Hernandez?
Yep. Hello, dear all. Thank you very much for this section. It's really good, and I'm very interested in this tilapia colonization, right? Because in Brazil we have quite some problems because of this fish, and I just want to contribute what Priscila said, because here in Manso, I'm also from Brazil, Priscila. I don't know if you. Yeah, in Manso we have in Mato Grosso we have a big reservoir. It's called Manso, and it goes to the Pantanal, and then it's a very important reservoir that we have here. But as perhaps you already heard, last year we had a very big drought, and Manso it's very dry, right? But it still has water. And then what's happening there is that we have lots of piranhas attack. And this is a big problem. And what people are trying to do now is trying to create a festival of fishing to catch this piranha out, because piranha is natural from here. But we have this piranha attack because the water is much smaller, right? The surface of water. And then this is one of the things that we're actually just thinking about what to do, right? And also they are competing with the other species, and we believe that this reservoir will lose a great part of the biodiversity there. And this is one of the problems that we are facing here, not with the exotic species, but with the native species that we have here, right? It's just a contribution. Thanks.
Thank you. I also have a question by Larissa here. Larissa, would you like to open your microphone, or do you want me to read it for you? well, I guess I'm going to read it. So she's saying after the introduction of tilapia, there was an increase in Calborus. Do you believe it's due to the reduction of predatory fish of this diptera? Competition, maybe competition between native and invasive species.
Yeah, so I also reached out to Larissa because her talk in this conference is, all about Calborus. So I thought, oh my God, amazing that it's so relevant to what we're looking at, because usually in paleolimnology, an increase in Calborus sort of indicates reduced fish predation, but we got this after the tilapia introduction. So yeah, it's exactly what she's is said, that we're suggesting that you have a reduction of predation on Calborus because those fish species that may be native to the lake are being outcompeted by this tilapia that's been introduced.
Thank you. Any more questions to Lily? Did I miss anyone here or no? No? I think we are done for a little bit. As I said, we have time. So I'm just gonna move on to my own presentation with Leandro. I'm not gonna do the presentation, but just do what you did, a summary. And if there's any questions, you guys can ask me, because it's kind of a different approach. Most people here seem to be interested in tilapia. I won't be talking about tilapia. So we can go back to Lily's work after I just say it. So in our case, Leandro and I, we co-supervised. It's actually my students' work. I don't know if you guys had a chance to watch the video, but we were studying pirarucu, which is arapaima, that super big fish that the Brazilians all know, but it's also known abroad because it's not only a huge scale fish, but it's also a fish that breeds outside the water, which I believe wasn't so clear in my presentation. I think I forgot to say that, and that's really important because that's how fishers can actually count the number of fish in the lakes, because the fish puts its head out of the water to breathe. So I assume that for someone who doesn't know that, you're probably like wondering, how can they tell the number of fish in a lake? So that's how. It's not just big, it's not just like the fish put its head outside the water, but it also makes a very loud sound. But it's still not that easy. You kind of have to be an expert to know how to count, to know if it's the same fish that's breathing here and there. And that's what I say in my presentation. It's a kind of knowledge that's passed from one generation to another. Leandro is an expert on this species. And even though he is an ecologist by training, not a human ecologist myself, he is the one that developed the whole method together with the fishers many years ago. And this method has become the official scientific method to count pirarucus in lakes in the Amazon. So fishermen told Leandro how they counted, and Leandro standardized the method, and that's how it's being managed now. So our interest in that specific question that I presented was to use past knowledge, since there is no fishing data in Brazil for all the species, but especially for the ones in the middle of nowhere, like in the middle of the Amazon. So we were trying to assess if fisheries memory could be a nice source of information for us to estimate the amount of fish there was in the past in the lakes, and if this is changing or not. As a peculiarity, pirarucu is a species that had its exploitation forbidden in multiple parts of the Amazon because it was overfished for centuries. The Portuguese, when came to Brazil, they already thought it was a great fish and that looked just like cod. In my opinion, whatever fish you salt just tastes like cod, salted fish. And then so there is evidence of overfishing for more than a couple of 100 years. So it basically collapsed in different places in the Amazon. But then there were some places where it didn't collapse, including the place where Leandro did his whole PhD. And part of it was because of the way people were managing this resource. So now in many places of the Amazon, this fish can be caught, and the only way its catch is allowed is under a co-management scheme. And that's when people get together, locals get together with the government, with environmental agencies, with NGOs, with universities to establish management rules for these species. So in our work, we investigated whether people could detect changes in sizes and changes in numbers of fish in lakes in different regions of the Amazon, co-managed and not co-managed. And we, as the main result, we see that people that started fishing in the 60s or in the 70s, depending on the region we are talking about two main rivers, in Juruá and in Purus. In one of the region, the very old fishermen, they still believe that in the beginning of their career, there was way more fish than they find today. But for younger ones who started fishing after the 70s, they already see some improvement in the regions that are being co-managed. So in a very general summary, we can tell like there's evidence that co-management is working, that there's way more fish now than there was in the past, but only if we talk about the recent past. If we go back to the 60s, then we haven't gotten to that point yet. And size-wise, we see no evidence that this fish has been resuming its original size. So this is a fish that can grow to 200 kilos or even more. I think Leandro can tell more detailed biological information on that. But over the years, the size of the fish that's caught has been decreasing, and even when co-managed, it's still not the same as people recall in the past. So we can use, and this is also what Leandro and I and other people have been working on the coast, we basically show that we can use people's memories to provide historical data on fish species. And this is especially important in that case, in lake cases, because there's basically no information at all. So I think that's it, two basic information. Yes, we can trust people to provide us interesting historical information. And at the same time, we can also see that there is evidence that fish is recovering in managed lakes, at least in numbers, though not in size. So I think that's it in terms of a summary. Leandro, would you like to add something to it? You are mute.
Sorry, I'm having computer problems here. I couldn't unmute. No, I think you did a very good job. I guess the discussion would be more interesting.
Okay, so does anyone have questions about that? I'm assuming that many of you are not familiar with this kind of method of trying to quantify historical information from people's memories.
I have a question, if that's okay. Yeah. I was wondering, did you have any way, did you ask any of the participants how sure they were about their response? So did you have any way to say if someone was, I'm really sure that this is what it was like before, or I'm actually not so sure?
We don't have this kind of question in general, like how sure are you, which is interesting because they can give a certain degree. There's a new method, I can go back to it later. We're using it here on the coast where we can quantify that. But they can also provide an estimate. They can say like, in the past, I would count between 12 and 15 fish every 20 minutes. 20 minutes because that's the interval they use to count fish. So there is that kind of information. And then there is variation from one fisherman to another. And another point, what kind of reduces our uncertainty is the fact that we only talked to expert fishers. So not just older ones, but the ones who can catch this specific fish. As I said, it's not something that that everybody can do. It takes a lot of practice. But there's a new method that people in Australia developed. They also work a lot with direct interviews with resource users, and they can quantify their uncertainty. And we are using that on the coast here too. But it's in a slightly different way. But for example, you ask, so how much do you think this species has decreased in the last decade? And they say like, a lot, not much. And then we ask them, what is a lot for you in terms of percentage? If they don't get, sometimes you're talking to very poor, vulnerable people where maybe they don't have enough education, and they don't have very clearly what percentage it means in numbers, but they can always find a way to explain it to you. So use different techniques depending on where you are. I'm saying this because maybe in Madagascar you can find the similar problems, but you can use rocks, you can use matches, whatever works for them. So then they say, like, to me a lot is 80%, but to another person a lot is 60 or 40. And with that variation within their perception, you can calculate a rate of decrease or of increase in a species for every single decade. You cannot, in the end, you cannot say we had 10 fish and now we have 20, but you can say in the last 50 years, we lost 20% of the fish in this region. So yeah, there's this kind of techniques.
Okay, I actually did have another question. In terms of your future work, you said that you're expanding it to work on the coast, or was that previous work? I was just wondering if you're doing it on any other species, or if you just plan to sort of broaden the scope of on the same species, but a wider area.
That approach is not necessarily new. What's new in that case is that we're not asking people to estimate how much fish they catch. We're asking people to estimate how much fish there is in a lake, which is very different because catch abundance is not the same as real biological abundance. So in the Amazonian case, the novelty is that we believe that we're closer to biological abundance rather than catch abundance. On the coast, we've done a lot of work with catch abundance. But now Leandro is leading a very big project that's covering pretty much most of the Brazilian coast, not every single point of it, but areas on different areas, different regions of the country. And he's comparing this information of like people's memories data with information from actual landing data. And the results are very impressive. I don't know if he wants to add to that, but people seem to be pretty reliable in the kind of data they provide, and not just for one species that can breed outside the water, for species that like normal fish species. Leandro, are you still there?
I am. It didn't sound like at the end you were asking. Yeah, so we found that on average, out of a sample of about 800 fishermen, their memories of past fish and catch and effort vary only about 26% around the true value, which we assume is the scientific data, which on its own has its problems, but that's our best point of reference. So in some cases, I think we have some estimates going back almost 4 decades. So that's an interesting tool to create some data, at least, for places where we have absolutely no information. And I was just thinking it would be interesting to consider using archaeological approaches, memory-based approaches, and other approaches to try and create, further reconstructions of the past.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the only reason why we know when the onset of chemical synthetic pesticide use in the area is from interviewing people. So, and as I say, we have such limited fish monitoring data that definitely it would benefit from being interviewing fishermen as well.
Yeah, I think the main point in that case is that you have to make sure that you're designing a very robust questionnaire or survey, because we as biologists or ecologists, sometimes we don't have the training to do that. And it's just like the same if social scientists decide to come into biology and do an experiment, they may not do the best experiment just because they don't know it. So it's always nice to really study, really get into what you are doing to make sure you get reliable answers, or else it's kind of difficult to get it published. But it would be great if you could do it in Madagascar too.
Probably would need a whole nother PhD student just to do that. But yeah, hopefully we could get someone, it'd be great.
Any more questions? The tilapia people. So I can see that Elio was here. I don't know if we lost him again. I guess we did.
I have a question if nobody else has.
Please go ahead.
It's a different approach to rely on people's memories, right? I mean, how much has this method been, I don't know, consolidated by the scientific community or something? I mean, I know nothing about that. I kind of trust you that this is a good method, but it's it's weird to rely on people's memories. I mean, just for personal experience, people tend to have very biased memories about the past. Like, did you have any ways to quantify like people's beliefs? Because I feel that people tend to overestimate or underestimate facts depending on what they believe is right or wrong or something, you know, like, I don't know, it's just
I think it's a very valid question. No, it's a very valid question. I think Leandro, that's what he was hinting at with his answer, his previous answer. Maybe you can explain that a little more, because it's all about that.
So Rodolfo, you got to the crux of the issue. So the idea of using, people's perceptions and memories has been around for maybe 20 years or so, at least, that they got prominence, and it has been growing a lot. I mean, not a lot, but every year there's more and more papers, so it's slowly picking up. With respect to using a resource user's memories or recalls of past rates of harvesting, which is so Priscila and I have this paper that we are working on. So I can tell you, up to today, there has been no more than 7 studies that actually had the people's recall or memory data and some kind of either visual census or scientific fish catch data. And the thing is, when you look at the results, about half of them found that the data match, and the other half found that the data do not match. And then some of them have rightly identified. So there was one that brought information from psychology that basically says, apparently in psychology, people remember not the average everyday event, but they remember, say, the biggest fish that they ever caught, or how bad years so and so was for fish. So the people remember extreme events and tend to forget the routine average events. So if you want to compare the two data sets, you have to focus on those extreme cases, not the average. And then there is some other sources of information. for instance, one article explained that, imagine a community of resource users, and that community, they say, like for instance, in Brazil, it's happening, has happened recently. There was a big oil spill on the coast. And so people can develop certain attitudes towards what's happening to the resource because they relate it to an impact, an environmental impact induced by a certain stakeholder. So they may, say dramatize the fact that there's less fish in order to, for a political reason, because they're trying to get attention to the fact that they were impacted by an oil company. So there's a range of issues. So the thing about this study that Priscila mentioned that we did along the coast of Brazil is we measured an absurd 113 variables from about 800 fishermen. And we measure all of these possible different factors that can influence their memories of fish catch. And we sought to try and interview the older fishers. But we were able to get a lot of interviews, but a lot of the interviews are from relatively young fishermen. And the results show what I mentioned before, that their memories on average, they are about 26% around the true value. And we found that how much they know about fishing, cultural factors such as whether they were raised in a family or a community that has a strong culture of fishing, who they learned fishing from, whether it was from somebody else or a family member, the level of economic dependence of their family on fishing related activities. So all these played a role in, usually they were directly associated with the quality of their memories, but the effect was very small. So overall, our conclusions are basically that if you just ask any fisherman, the chances are the result is going to be relatively accurate. So I think our paper is going to be maybe one of the 6th or 7th in the literature or so that actually quantified, and actually with respect to the average catch, our results show the average catch had the best match with the scientific average data, which kind of contradicts the rest of the literature. And
more or less, right? Because there is that study by Jones in 2011, which is, I always find that fascinating, because the whole idea that people have is that fishermen, they lie, and when they lie, they usually exaggerate their catches. And that's, it's a belief that we have anywhere in the world. But then this study, this woman, she measured the catches, so she knew exactly for a whole year what they were catching, and then she came back a year later and asked them again, so how much did you catch? And it turned out to be this idea that we have about them turned out to be just half true, because the ones that catch less than the average of the community, they exaggerated their catches. But the ones that caught above the average of the community, they downplayed their catches. So in the end, the results were like very close to the real average. People's memories were close to the average because they were either exaggerating or downplaying their own fishing. And one hypothesis that she proposes, and she's an ecologist, she cannot really test that, is that maybe we just look around what's happening. We know what we did, but if it's nothing remarkable, as Leandro was saying, like the best catch ever, the worst catch ever, it's just like the everyday catch, we forget about those maybe. But then we see what everybody's doing, and we just, in the end, what we remember is just like the average situation of the whole place. And maybe that's why they can provide like a reasonably good average assessment of what's happening there.
That was a very complete answer. Thank you.
We can go on like much longer on that if you want. There's another point that it always intrigues me is that if people are very religious, for example, they may change their answer because they won't accept that fish can end, because God would never allow that. And in my experience, especially in the Amazon, people seem to have, but this is just my perception, there's nothing tested, that people seem to have like a switch in their heads. Depending on the question you ask them, they will give like very rational explanations. They will explain, yes, there was fish, that there were a lot more fish, but then there were a lot of people, and we increased the number of gears, increased our effort, and now we are losing everything. But then if you ask a more general question, so you get all of that information, you can quantify all of that, but if you ask a more general question like, okay, so after everything you said, do you think that fish has been decreasing in your region? Then they switch and they say, no, that would never, fish is hiding. It's somewhere there, but fish never ends, because what God created cannot disappear. But they gave you all the answers you needed before, so you can calculate what's happening in the region. So that's, again, like the importance of asking the right questions, just so you don't mix. You're always going to mix, because they're still people. We are all still people, and we are going to have our biases. But you can still get good enough information to model.
Yeah, that sounds a lot like any other subject that you ask about to people, right? Like, you can get the correct, not the correct, but the approximately right information, I don't know, about anything, but then when you tell them to summarize, then they put a lot of bias in there, right? That's interesting. And also we as scientists also have a lot of biases. And maybe that was one of my biases, like how much can you trust people's memories? I don't know.
So Leandro hopefully is going to prove that with his paper, that we can trust them enough with the right questions.
Yeah, I had some friends that work on this interface between ecology and human sciences, and they have all of that. I mean, asking questions and making questionnaires are almost a science in itself. It's a very hard thing to do. So I trust that is a solid method.
It can be. Thank you, Rodolfo. Is there any more questions?
I had a question that I was going to ask Elias if he had joined us, but it was about, in his interviews, he found that participants didn't necessarily know or the ecosystem services of lakes. So they didn't, in his interview, he didn't get the sense that they knew about the nutrient cycling and that sort of thing. And obviously the role of the interviews weren't to educate people on that, but I was just wondering if you found with your fishing interviews, if just by doing the interviews and engaging with people who were fishing, did you feel like it made them more interested in understanding the biology of the fisheries or that sort of thing? Like they had an opportunity to sort of ask and talk about that?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Depending on how you design a survey, you can design a survey to also be an educational tool, and sometimes it happens accidentally. I'll tell you another case in the Amazon that happened to us a few years ago, and it's something that hasn't been published yet. We were doing a study on fisheries, but then the fishermen were always saying like, yeah, we hate dolphins because dolphins destroy our nets. They're the worst thing ever. They cause a lot of economic losses. And so we came back from the field thinking, okay, it's gonna be hard. Like these people really hate dolphins, and they'll probably fish them more and more. And let's try to develop calculate the economic losses, because then maybe we can propose some payment for ecosystem services to compensate them for the losses. And then we went back to the field, and we had this whole interview where we were calculating their losses. Okay, so how often do you have to get your nets out of the water to fix it because of the dolphins, the damage caused by dolphins, and everything, every single detail. And then in the end, the last question was kind of similar to what I was just describing to Rodolfo, which to me, the first time I was about, even though it was my survey with a colleague, it seemed like a stupid question, because it was like, okay, so in the end, what's your general opinion about dolphins? Are they bad, good, or neutral? And I was like, why am I asking this? These people hate dolphins. They've been just cursing them for 40 minutes. And then we started getting this really interesting response. Whenever I asked, it happened so many times, not once, not twice. Whenever we asked that question, they would stop and think for a while, and then they would say like, yeah, you know, dolphins are good. And I was, what? I agree with you, but what are you saying? And they would say, you know, like if it wasn't for the dolphins, there wouldn't be any fish. We would have caught everything already. So when they come, sometimes we just have to leave, stop fishing right away, because otherwise they're going to destroy our nets. So they're basically the environmental agents of the river. So yeah, they're good. And we got that so many times. And that was like, we're not expecting that. That turned out to be the main finding of our research. So that's a case where the survey can kind of make them realize certain things. Any more questions? It can be to Lily too. We can go back to tilapias. We still have a few minutes. Leandro is probably going to leave soon. So if you have a question to Leandro, because he has to join another panel.
I will actually, so I have 5 minutes to go in the other one. I will actually take this opportunity to thank everyone for coming here. I'm going to have to leave, but I hope you guys can continue. Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Leandro, for joining us. I just got a message saying that Elio, he had a problem with his internet connection, so unfortunately he could not join us today. So it's just the two of us now, Lily. We can keep talking.
I know, such a small session. It's so funny. And then I was looking at the other sessions, and some of them have so many talks, and I was really like, oh, it's too much.
No, we were about the initial idea, because there are other sessions that are very small. So we were going to join us with Sarian's session, which is happening right now, and also I think her session also has 3 presenters. So we're going to join everybody there, and then it was okay. Like we have enough rooms, like let's just have our small conversations in those rooms. Yeah, because the themes are not related. But so you guys are here, all the tilapia people. So you feel free. There's a question, I think. Oh no, there isn't. Feel free to ask anything else to Lily or to me. But I figure you're more interested in tilapias.
Yeah, I'm not really a tilapia person. Just yeah, using tilapia in an experiment was kind of an accident, a fortunate accident, but it was cool. Then I met Lily on yesterday, and then she said, "Oh, I work with tilapia." It's like, oh, I need to know more about that. So here I am. And it was nice to know a bit more about the memory surveys and things like that.
Yeah, and all of these works, they have been published. We have been publishing them, and other groups have been publishing them in like regular ecological journals. Like we had a very nice one published last week on biodiversity and conservation, on shark species and their threatened status, totally based on Fisher's knowledge too. That was like really cool work. So I guess the point is just design a surveys really well, and you can get a lot of information. Like you guys, most of you are from Brazil, and you know that we have no data, no past data. Lily is working in Madagascar, maybe she's facing the same problems. And we just have to be very creative. She with her paleolimnological data, we with our historical data, we have to do whatever it takes to get information.
I was just, I have no question for you, Priscila, but I was just glad to see your work because, and also Lily, because I work with tilapia and I came here to see tilapia, but not just tilapia, okay, but fishing. But in my work, I had a lot of problems with absence of data, and this kind of work that turn back come to the past could help a lot if I had this kind of data to explain a lot of things, you know. And one of my future works that I would like to do is something like this that you are developing with the interviews with the fishers, because it helps a lot. I have a huge database here in Brazil from PELD, here in Northeast from 10 years of PELD, and then I have a lot of work with fishers, with fishing, and a lot in my work with tilapia, but we really miss the data from fishers, really miss it, and it could help us. In some way they help it, but it was formal, not like you. So I'm glad to see, because maybe it's gonna be maybe a future work, and I like a lot the way you are doing it, and also the records on the sediment, right? Maybe future work can help a lot here what we have. So just it.
Yeah, that's the only thing that's difficult about the looking at the sediment cores, is that you do have to learn what you're looking for. It's really highly specific, but once you can do it, it's fine, but it can be, I think, quite daunting learning it from the beginning. But yeah, a colleague in my department, so my department in UCL in London, they do a lot of paleo work with the sediment cores. So yeah, so one of my colleagues, she's done some work in reservoirs in Brazil. But yeah, it definitely should be used more, especially in the shorter term context. It's not usually applied, even though you have a sediment record for the last few hundred years. And in the lake that I'm working at, the sediment accumulation rate is quite high. So you have, 1 or 2 centimeters of sediment per year. It's quite a lot. But it's still not used to look at that shorter term record, which I think is a shame, but hopefully people will be doing it more.
I just would like to make a comment, because before that work of Coca in Ezek, right, that he tried to remove all tilapia from the lakes. We always think on remove tilapia, but now what I think is that we cannot remove tilapia from lakes, mainly because it's really important for the fishermen, for the local economy. Is really important. But we need to manage tilapia there, right? And I have my work that I'm still, this month I will submit all of them, I hope. And the general results that we have is that we really have to manage them, and we have to have the predator with the controlled fishing. Because if I have a controlled fishing with the predator, we have a big tilapias, we have environmental with less less nutrient input, and we have everything good, right? So now the things is that we need to deal with tilapia inside the environment and not remove right now, something like that.
Yeah, I think it's very similar to what Lily described. And it's probably a reality that we're going to have to face with multiple introduced species everywhere in the world. We won't be able to remove them, just have to learn how to live with them. Okay, so if there's any more comments or questions? Or else I think we should end the session. So thank you so much again for joining us. It was small, but productive. I'm happy you guys are here. And don't forget to join us later today. The 3 faces I see on my screen, I think you were all there yesterday. So please join us again this afternoon. Yeah, thanks again.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, and thank you all for your really interesting questions, and great to meet you and talk to you about all of your work. So yes, thanks.
Bye-bye, guys. Thanks, Lily.